either of these guys. And Yuri was the guy I was telling you about that was literally on the movie as long as me, 4.5 years. He was the first hire.
Yeah.
And the last fire.
Yeah, that's right. And they dragged me out with my fingers.
That's
in
right,
the carpet.
exactly.
Yeah.
He went, isn't there more to do? There's got to be
Come
more.
on, there's a DVD I know. Oh, wait, here we are.
And Rob, I hadn't worked with before, but certainly knew of his work. And he came in, and I think in the first few days, you did a couple of images. There was some,
Yeah.
there was an image a lot like this, I think, that had the planets.
Yeah. Okay, tell that story real quick.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. You know, I had never worked with Jim before, and I got a call that he you know, to come in and meet him, and I asked him.
Previously, we were lucky to get him, but he recognized right away that he needed what you knew about the visual effects in the virtual art department. So he actually did something very gracious, which is elevated Rob to shared status as production designer on the film, and then had to go. You two guys had to go sell that to the Production Designer Guild, and we actually thought that it might jeopardize her Oscar chances because nobody had ever done that before. Fortunately, it was correctly recognized that it was a marriage of the live action and the virtual production processes.
Not only that, I think it's a perfect film for two production designers, and because it's bringing two creative sensibilities, it's clashing together in a sense.
Two worlds.
Which is what's going on in the movie. So since we were in charge of the sort of organic side and Rick was in charge of the man-made side, it actually worked perfectly for this movie.
One of the things we struggled with a lot was the bioluminescence, and I know Rob, you and the other artists did a tremendous amount of artwork before we settled in on a look for the plants and the bioluminescence. Because at first you think, well, okay, just everything glows, but if everything glows, then it doesn't look like night. Yeah. It just looks like some pastel version of day. So it was figuring out what was negative and what was positive, and coming up with the language for that, and color spectrum. It took quite a while. And then it took a while again to reinvent in CG.
Yeah, I think we sort of finally figured out that it's actually an old black and white photographer trick, which is playing dark against light against dark against light, is what gives you a graphic separation.
Right, like the silhouette of this bow right here against the lit atmosphere beyond it. So these techniques were all worked out in art, literally renderings that these guys were doing, and then they had to find the CG equivalent for it when Weta had to recreate that look. So it was quite a kind of R&D process, and it was ongoing right to the end. Every time we did a new night scene, we discovered it again all over again.
Yeah, I think it was also tricky to. I was saying how important it was for the environment to reveal itself with Jake's character over time and become beautiful, so that we care about it ourselves.
Do you have any of the early, because some of the early renderings, the forest all have blue leaves, blue or cyan leaves.
Yeah, I don't think we have any of those up. That was done in that time, but there's no blue.
But so, and then at a certain point,
Here, some.
a little bit, yeah, right over here you can see it. So some of the earlier stuff, the forest was much bluer, and then the thought was, well, we're creating the forest 100% CG. Nobody's ever really done that before. Normally they would shoot in a real rainforest and then add the CG characters. That's how the Jurassic Park films were done, for example. So we thought, well, maybe when we first see the forest, it needs to feel instinctively more real. So we went back to a color palette that was more terrestrial. And we thought, all right, then we'll use the night to evolve into a more phantasmagorical environment. And that's where Rob's team really took us. But that, these things take time. They take a long time to think out so that they actually work.
Yeah, but I think another thing that we were always searching, like deep sea critters that glow, things of terrestrial things that are amazing, but usually hidden around corners, things that actually exist. I know that we sort of scoured and did tons of research just to make things more real. We wouldn't make something just because it looked good. It had to be grounded in some other reality or physics or whatever it needs to be. But I think that if you add all that up, is what makes this particular movie feel so real.
And the costumes, for example, when Deborah approached a costume like this or like this, is H-Con around someplace? No, maybe down there. But this is an incredibly complex costume, and it had to be all physically fabricated, so that every texture, the way the light played across these different surfaces. So it was all physically fabricated, the entire costume. I wish. Oh, there you go.
That's part of it.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. So then they would take this. They would scan these. They would model all these. So every one of these little beads had to exist in CG. Then they would photograph this. They would put the textures onto and they would assign volumetric values to this part of it. And this is all in CG now. It doesn't, it doesn't exist. So in order to be able to do that, it was great for the CG artists to be able to take it, handle it, see how it moved, do motion studies where they put it on someone and saw how it swayed and moved, so that they could assign the necessary mathematical values to this, because they do a lot of stuff with what they call simulation. Part of it is animation, part of it is simulation. With the human or with the Na'vi characters, they were using captured motion from the actors, and then when they put a piece of wardrobe like this on CCH Pounder's character, the motion that she did when she performed the character would be applied to this model, and the simulation would allow it to move with correct physics, with the correct momentum and sway, lag, all the things that are physics based. So that was a big part of the process. And still none of that involved animation at that point. Where the animators came in was when somebody's hand touched a wall, our performance capture was not accurate enough to get the exact nuances of how that hand might move or press or interact. So they'd have to look how much pressure do they want on the fingertips. That's where the performance, or where the keyframe animation came in, mostly in the hand performance. Not so much in the facial or the body performance.
And the ears.
Oh, and the ears.
And the tail.
Well, obviously the actors couldn't act the ears and act the tail. And subliminally within scenes, the ears and the tail are communicating a tremendous amount of emotional information about what the emotional state, the anger. If you have cats, that the lashing of the tail is, you can always tell what a cat's thinking. The same with the ears. So we had to come up with a whole vocabulary that was supportive of the actor's emotional states and didn't react in a way that was ahead of or behind what the actor was doing. So the keyframe animation came in at that point because the actors couldn't provide that part. Now we gave them ears and a tail so that they would spatially account for it, so they would remember that they had a tail.
They couldn't sit on their tail without knowing that it was there.
Yeah, which is why the Na'vi mostly squat as opposed to sit. They almost never sit. They usually are sitting in a squat. So anyway, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to.